Thank you guys. Thank you so much for joining IPEVO's webinar. My name is Michael. How's everyone doing today? I hope everyone's doing really well. Today we have two Michaels. My name is Michael Pai, and then we have a very special guest, Michael Soskil in the house. Michael is a Global Teacher Prize Top 10 finalist, Philadelphia Teacher of the Year, international speaker, author, and then he'll give you a talk about finding a balance between humanity and education technology in a time of uncertainty. So during the presentation, feel free to chat, feel free to raise any questions and let us know, and then we'll try to get back to you later. All right. So without further ado, let's welcome Michael Soskil. Yay! Thank you.
So I need you to stop sharing your screen, and I'm
gonna. Yeah, sorry. Totally forgot about that. Totally.
No worries. There. Okay.
You do it.
Let's just get this started. So, hi everyone. Thank you so much for having me today, Michael.
Sure.
So I'm really excited about this webinar for a couple reasons. One, I'm really passionate about the topic, but also I'm really thrilled to do this with IPEVO. I've had a relationship with IPEVO for a while, starting back probably, I don't know, 10 years ago or so, when we reached out to you guys because we were running an ed camp in Northeastern Pennsylvania, and we asked for some sponsorship. And since that time, IPEVO has been absolutely amazing about supporting professional learning and professional development for teachers. I've used your products in my classroom. I've spoken in your booth at ISTE. It's just been, you guys have been amazing, and the work you do helping teachers not just use your products, but just do a good job in their classroom for kids has been awesome. So I'm so thrilled that we were able to pull this together today. And welcome to everyone that's joining us. So let me start by just saying that if you have other devices, or if you have a second browser window open, go ahead and do that. That's fine. The first time I ever presented to teachers was back in 2010. I was presenting at a Pennsylvania math teacher conference, and I was using technology to back channel with some other teachers that couldn't go to the conference that were back home. And so I was typing away and sending notes as fast as I could in the first session. And the person who was presenting looked at me and said, "Hey, if you're going to be playing on your computer, I need you to get out." And she threw me out of the room. And from that moment on, I said, you know, whenever I present, I am going to make sure that if teachers are on their computer, or if they're using their devices, I want them to do that. If they're back channeling or taking notes, that's great. If they're playing games because I'm so boring, well, that's on me. So go ahead and have your devices out. Feel free. My Twitter handle is there. If you're going to use social media, feel free to tag me and IPEVO in it. I am going to be asking you to go to a second browser at some time, so you may want to have a second browser tab open. And don't worry about, you can screenshot or you can take notes as we're going, but I am going to provide you a link to all of the slides at the end. So if there's any resources that you don't catch in real time, you'll be able to catch up on those later. And I will say that I'm going to talk about some philosophy and why we need to change things at the beginning of this presentation. But I am promising you that I am going to give you a ton of tools that you can either use in your classroom, or if you work with teachers, you can help them use in their classroom. I'm going to leave you with practical things that you can implement. I want to make sure that you are able to take away things that you can do with kids. So I promise you that also. So let me tell you a little bit about where I'm coming from, because we can't talk about humanity without talking about perspectives, and you should know how I see the world. Yes, great. Q&A section, Michael, before I go on, you're right. We do have that Q&A panel. At any time, feel free to reach out and ask questions. I have told Michael that he can interrupt me anytime he needs. So if I'm talking too much, just shoot Michael the question if you have something you want to ask, and he can feel free to interrupt me. So sorry about that. Sorry I didn't mention that. But I definitely see the world as a father. These are my two kids. This was taken out in Bryce Canyon National Park out in Utah. We're going down to Shenandoah National Park this Thursday. I'm really excited about that. We love to hike. We love to be outdoors. But I want them to grow up in the kind of world that is safe and inclusive and prosperous. And one of the reasons that I'm a teacher, one of the reasons that I work with other teachers, is to try and build the kind of world that I want for my kids. The other group of children that I love are my students. This is a picture from my classroom. I teach in Northeastern Pennsylvania. If you were on a little bit before we got started, Michael and I were talking about where I live. It is a small town, only about 2,000 people. I live in the middle of the woods, back on a dirt road. It's very rural. There's a lot of rural poverty. Most of my kids come to school needing school lunches, needing some of the other supports that we provide as a school in addition to academics. So I very much understand the equity issues we have when it comes to opportunity between rural, suburban, and urban. But there's also not a whole lot of diversity in my town. We are 96% white as students, and that presents its own challenges because the world is becoming more global, and I need to find ways to expose my students to what the world looks like outside of our small town. And so we're going to talk about some ways to do that today also. So I want to start by asking each of you to reflect on a question. Why is it that you teach? Why did you choose to become a teacher? Why did you choose to become an educator? Why is it that we do what we do? Because I think so many times we talk about tools, we talk about what we're going to do in schools and how we're going to do things, but we don't talk about why we do them. And until we have this foundation, until we understand why we're educating and why we're teaching, it's tough to get all of those other things right. So I want you to reflect on that and ask yourself that question before we move forward. And I'll tell you when I found my purpose. It wasn't, I chose to teach the same reason that most other people do. I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to work with kids. I loved, I loved showing kids new things that helped them grow and become better. As I've talked with pre-service teachers all over the world, that tends to be the reason why people choose teaching. But for me, my purpose really got exposed, and you see this call right here, this Skype call that we had. My 4th and 5th grade students connected with a group of kids in the Kibera slum of Nairobi. If you don't know much about Kibera, it's an area of about 10 square miles. It's the largest and one of the most populated slums in all of Africa. About 1.5 million people live in that area, in those 10 square miles. And it is the kind of abject poverty that those of us in the West, we have a tough time imagining it. But we connected with this group of students, and you can see their school there. And we were preparing for a St. Patrick's Day concert. So we sang our songs instead of singing to an empty cafe gymatorium. We sang to the students in Kenya. They sang some songs to us in Swahili. They sang their national anthem. They sang a friendship song. And there was a connection made. And afterwards, my students came to me and they had tears in their eyes. And they said, Mr. Soskil, we see the conditions of their school. We see how they're learning, and they're just like us, and they're wonderful, and they had such passion, and they were smiling, but their school doesn't look like ours, and that's not right. We should do something about that. And in that moment, I made a decision that I don't know where it came from. It was kind of serendipitous. And I said, of course, we can do something to help them, but I want you to ask for something in return, because I want you to find value in the people you're trying to help. I didn't say it in those words, but that's what I was thinking in my head. And what my students ended up doing is they came up with a two-prong approach. They used the math manipulatives, the materials that we had in our classroom, to shoot short videos teaching mathematics with materials that the kids in Kenya didn't have. And in return, they had the kids in Kenya teach us Swahili. So every week we'd get a Swahili video teaching us the days of the week or the months of the year. We'd play it for the whole school. And then my students would create a math video and we'd exchange, and that went on for months. And through that process, relationships were built. And a couple of months later, when my students found out that school supplies were not the biggest issue facing those kids, that during the rainy season, the pit toilets would overflow in the slum, and some of the unmentionables would get into the water supply, my students came to me again and they said, those are our friends. We can't let that happen. We need to do something about that. And so my students partnered with kids in Greece and Kansas to raise money for water filters. And in exchange, the kids in Kenya taught us some gardening techniques, because it always has to be a two-way street. But over the course of a couple of months, the three groups of students were able to raise about $12,000 for water filters. So we were able to provide, you see the big blue filter there, where we were able to protect all of the students and staff at schools, but also send water filters home with kids. And I happened to write a grant, and I was in Kenya when the water filters were delivered. And the most powerful moment of my teaching career came that day. And yes, of course, it was emotional as the kids were getting their water filters, because they were hugging them. I was there during the rainy season. There was a cholera outbreak, and 12 children actually died of cholera during the 2 weeks I spent in Kenya during that trip. So you can imagine how emotional it was for the kids receiving the filters. But what was so powerful for me, what changed me as a teacher, was we had a 7-school Skype call where all of the kids that raised money for the water filters were able to meet the children that they helped. And I saw my students 7,500 miles away through the computer screen, and they were crying. And those tears were tears of joy, They were realizing the joy that comes from doing good for others and using your learning for that purpose. And I said to myself, I knew from that moment on, this is my purpose. This is my why. I'm going to not only work to do this more for my students, but I'm going to help others do the same kind of thing. And so that's the frame of reference that I'm coming to this presentation for all of you. That's where I'm coming from. That's my why. This picture is an actual picture from the Cassini spacecraft. It's a picture of Saturn, and Saturn is backlit. The sun is behind the planet in this picture. And why I show this to you is I want to take a look right over there. You see that blue dot? That blue dot is Earth. We have so much more in common with each other than we have differences. We all live on that tiny little blue dot in space. As teachers, we need to help our students find a shared humanity. It doesn't mean that we don't appreciate differences and that we don't see the different experiences that people have or the different attributes that they bring to the learning process and into our society. But we understand that we are humans first, and we need to treat each other in that way. And experiences with technology that allow us to do that for students in school, those are the most powerful experiences. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. How do we do that? Geert Biesta, who is a Belgian education researcher, wrote a chapter in the book that I have that's being produced right now, Flip the System US. And he talks about the intersection of three things that make education, that get education right for a healthy democracy. If we're going to have a healthy democratic society, we need these three things to be in balance. Qualification, we do really well here in the United States, and most world education systems do the same. That's college and career readiness, making sure our kids are qualified for something outside of school after they graduate. We're good at that. The two areas where we're somewhat weak are socialization and subjectification. Socialization is how we educate kids to interact and fit into the society in which that's educating them. So this is the reason why we see so much polarization in our societies, political polarization. We've lost the ability to have nuanced conversations that are respectful when we disagree. That's part of that socialization process. The other piece that we're somewhat deficient in right now is subjectification. Making sure that kids are holistically well, making sure that all of their needs are met and that they find their own purpose. They find their self. We need to put those things back in balance. And the way that we do that is by making sure that the educational experience isn't just focused on economic means, but is also focused on growing students as individuals, as people. So I'm going to ask you to open up that second browser tab that you had and go to menti.com. And you can see there's a code over there on the side of the screen. So go ahead and put that in. Back in 2013, Johnson & Johnson, the pharmaceutical company, they did a study. It's peer-reviewed. You can find it online, where they looked at the most successful people that they could find, and they tried to find out what are the character traits that these people have that make them successful. So I want you to take a guess. What character trait do you think they found correlates most closely with success? So I'm going to pause here and let everyone kind of go to Menti and put in their one-word answer. What is that character trait that correlates with success? That's what you're going to put in. And Michael, while I'm doing that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. We're going to go check out those answers.
Sure.
But if there's any questions that are coming in, feel free to shoot them my way, and I can talk as I do this.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, so let's pull up the answers and let's see what people have said.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah. So we've got 5 or 6 answers coming in now. Let's take a look. So we've got perseverance, dedication, risk-taking. All of these are great answers. Authenticity, being a good listener, determination. These are answers that I see quite a bit. Grit, determination tends to show up a lot. But what's really interesting, and we'll see if any more answers, I'm going to give another 30 seconds or so to see if anything comes in. But the answer that came up, and this was back in 2013, this study was done, actually matches the #1 character trait that both the World Economic Forum and OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, both of them have identified this skill that we're going to talk about, this character trait, as being most needed for kids in the workforce in 2030 and beyond. So lots of great guesses there, but actually the answer is emotional intelligence and empathy, having those social skills to be able to understand other people. And so, I can tell you that In 22 years of teaching, I've had a lot of professional development sessions that have been mandated for me. I have had a lot of faculty meetings. Never once have I had a meeting that was focused specifically on building empathy and emotional intelligence in students. And so I think there's a huge disconnect there, right? If it's the most important thing that we teach, we really should focus on it more. So let's talk about how we can do that. First, we need to understand what empathy is, right? If it's so important, what is it? It's not just being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes, right? That's how we normally define it. And that's part of it. But it's being able to understand their perspective, right? Not just understand what it's like to be them, but understand how their actions are shaped by their history, right? By the experiences that they've had in their past. There's a big difference between sympathy and empathy. Feeling bad for someone is not empathy, that's sympathy, right? And often if we act out of sympathy, we dehumanize the person that we're trying to help. So it's important to see each other as equals, right? That's the reason why we had that two-way exchange before. We want to humanize the other. People who are different than us, we want to see them as humans first. We want to find that shared humanity. And of course, compassion is a huge part of this. The trends that we see, and all of you that have been teaching during the COVID pandemic and remote teaching know that we have seen equity gaps really been driven wider. There's been a huge disparity between affluent suburban kids having devices, having internet access, and the experiences that kids in poorer urban areas or in rural areas like mine, where there's not a lot of internet, there's been a difference in how they experience school. Those equity gaps are being felt all over society, and a lot of them are being driven by technological innovation. And so as we talk about the intersection of the two things, we're talking about technology and empathy and humanity today, we need to recognize that this is a trend that has been going on far before COVID. So every new technology drives equity gaps wider because the haves have more opportunity to make money, more political opportunity, and those that don't fall further and further behind. Right now, there are self-driving cars in my home state of Pennsylvania, in Pittsburgh. If you call an Uber, you might get a self-driving car. But at the same time, 16 to 17% of the world lives without electricity. So those gaps globally are getting wider, but they're also getting wider in our local communities. There's a danger if we assume that our perspectives, if we generalize those and assume that others have the same experiences, that gets dangerous, right? This is almost the opposite of empathy, when we're not looking at not putting ourselves into other people's perspectives. But that's especially true. The difference in experience between people living in rural, suburban, and urban areas is greater now than it ever has been. As a matter of fact, I did some work with OECD in Paris in 2017. And back then I was told that if you live in the rural United States, let's say in Wyoming, you have more in common with someone living in rural Romania in your experiences every day than someone living in New York City. And so when we think of differences in experience, we often think in like country differences. But the fact of the matter is the differences are much bigger between rural and urban areas than they are within between different countries. And so we need to understand those different perspectives if we're going to have those nuanced, complex conversations that allow us to solve these global problems that are big and complex themselves. Some of the trends that we're seeing because of the technological innovation, you can see on the screen. Pearson did this study a couple of years ago. You can see increasing inequality is there. Political uncertainty, we certainly see that. Globalization, the world is becoming smaller, but also urbanization, more and more people are living in cities. And so all of those are impacting how our students experience the world as well. The good news for us, a lot of people are worried about their job being automated and being lost. For those of us that are teachers, there's a great news. We have a very low probability of our job being taken over by machines. It doesn't mean that machines aren't going to do some of the things that we do as our job, but our jobs are pretty safe. And there's, I believe, two reasons for this. One, no machine will ever be able to make the number of decisions that we do as teachers every day. Our job is incredibly complex and we're constantly taking in data, analyzing it, and making decisions based on it. That would be very difficult for a machine to do. But even more important, no machine will ever be able to love students the way that we love students. Nobody wants their 5-year-old going to a kindergarten teacher that is a robot, because sometimes your kindergarten kid needs a hug and you want the kindergarten teacher to be able to give it to him. Empathy and compassion is those uniquely human traits are the things that we do best as teachers. So we need to make sure that education stays grounded in them. Maggie McDonnell is one of my favorite people in the world. She is I see Michael nodding, he knows Maggie. Maggie is a phenomenal teacher. She was the winner of the 2017 Global Teacher Prize, and she has a great perspective when it comes to these, solving problems globally. She teaches in a remote village up in the Arctic in Canada, even smaller than my town here in Pennsylvania, but also way more remote. The only way in is to either fly in, or I believe you can take a boat, but only during the summertime because it freezes in. So they're incredibly isolated. And in her indigenous community up there are huge problems with sexual abuse, alcohol abuse, drugs, teen suicide rate is through the roof. As a matter of fact, when I first met Maggie, she told me that in the 6 years that she taught in Saluit, she had to attend 10 of her students' funerals. Incredibly heartbreaking, some of the issues there. But she became the winner of the Global Teacher Prize because of the work she did building relationships in her community and turning those trends around. And when I first met her, I asked her, how did you do it? And she said, one of the things that I did is I wouldn't allow people to focus on the problems. When they came to me with some of the problems, I said, don't give me problems, give me solutions. And when I heard that, that was a driving force behind me and 5 other Global Teacher Prize finalists putting together this book, Teaching in the Fourth Industrial Revolution. There are a lot of people talking about the impact of technology on education. Very few of them are practitioners. So all 6 of us that wrote this book work in schools. 5 of us are teachers, 1 is a principal from 5 different countries, looking at all of the things that we just talked about. How can we make sure that our schools are preparing kids for the future that they're going to face? And the basis of our book is right here in this diagram, and that's what we're talking about today. Of course, we want our schools to be technologically relevant. We don't want kids to come to school and not see technology, because if they do, they'll know that what we're preparing them for is not the real world. But at the same time, education must stay rooted in the things that are most important: humanity, empathy, compassion, relationships. If we can find that sweet spot, that's how we can ensure that our society going forward will be prosperous. And we have to remember that not all solutions are technological, right? Sometimes you need analog solutions. Sometimes technology does not work for the problem that you have, right?
Yeah,
if any of you have seen this French commercial, right? I took 2 screenshots, but you get the idea, right? Sometimes we need to look analog. So before looking to virtual reality and artificial intelligence, both of those things are amazing. I'm a tech geek. I love playing with them. But more important, we need to make sure that our children are able to use emotional intelligence and that they can cope with actual reality. And we know the mental health crisis in our schools right now is out of control. So we need to focus on those things first, make sure our students are well. In the book, we talked about, most people that are familiar with educational technology use know about SAMR. We think that SAMR was developed and was great for the 3rd industrial revolution, the internet age. But we feel like right now there needs to be a new step on top of that SAMR model. In addition to using technology to create experiences that weren't possible before, we need students to be able to use those newly possible experiences to solve global issues, to find that shared humanity, to make the world a better place. So let's talk about how we can do that. First, you can't change the world if you don't know much about it. I know this from experience because I teach in an area where my kids are pretty isolated. We're about 2.5 hours from New York City by car, but most of my students will not go there. That'll be a once-in-a-lifetime trip. It's just not a place where, there are definitely some of our kids that can, but for the majority of our kids, it's not somewhere that they're going to be able to get to on a regular basis. And so we're isolated culturally. Like I said before, there's not a whole lot of diversity. And so I have, for the past 15, 20 years, looked for ways to use technology to bridge that gap, to give them exposure outside. We've connected live with 96 different countries, with astronauts on the International Space Station, with scientists in Antarctica who are studying penguins. We've done it through a variety of different ways. Some of them are listed there on the right-hand side of the screen, but I am going to give you lots of tools that will allow you to do this with your students. I'm going to give you some of my favorite tools, some of the easiest ones to use, and I'm going to give you a scaffold. If you've never done this kind of work before, I'm going to show you how you can get started and where the next steps are. So first, I believe we need to combine 2 things. The Sustainable Development Goals, UN back in 2015 came up with 17 goals. I think it was 192 countries came together to say these are the 17 goals for us to create the kind of world that we want by 2030. By exposing your kids to those global goals, it shows them how their learning and how their passions can intersect with making the world a better place. I've got 3 great resources down there on the screen. Teach SDGs is a group of 30,000 plus teachers from around the world that are doing this kind of work. There's resources for you, there's lessons, there's a great community that you can collaborate with on social media, teachsdgs.org. The world's largest lesson is in partnership with UNESCO. It's a nonprofit organization, but it also has fantastic resources and lessons that allow your kids to do just what we're talking about on this slide, combine the engineering design process with those global goals to make the world a better place. And then finally, the SDGs book that's down the bottom, it's a free download. It has about a dozen lessons that were created by actual classroom teachers from, I believe, 15 different countries collaborated on it. I might have that number off. But there are lessons that are soup to nuts. You can implement them in your classroom right now to get your kids started with the Sustainable Development Goals. And while we're teaching the SDGs, we also want our kids to be problem solvers. And the engineering design process is great for engineers, but it's also the same process that artists use to create to create works of art, or musicians use to create music. It starts with figuring out what the problem is, coming up with possible solutions, putting it into place, seeing if it works, and then making it better if it doesn't. And so we want our kids to be intentional about going through that process and teaching them that design process so that they can become natural problem solvers. And I'm going to share some different ways that we can do that as we go forward. Within those 2 things, PBL is a great way to get started, both project and problem-based learning. This is the progression that I see most teachers go through if they've never used PBL before. We should mention that project-based learning is not just doing projects. Back when I was a kid, we used to learn a social studies unit, and then my teacher would assign a diorama. I would come home, have my parents do it if I was lucky. If they did a good job, I'd get an A. If it was kind of shoddy, maybe my parents would get a B, right? But I didn't learn much through those projects. With PBL, you're not learning before you do the project. You have to complete in order to complete the project, you have to do the learning, right? So it starts usually when teachers start with this kind of teaching, with this kind of pedagogy. It starts with the teacher making most of the decisions and dictating to kids what they should be doing, and there's some choice in there, and kids learn in order to be able to create a project. A great example of a PBL unit might be having kids create a museum, right? So each student creates an artifact about something that you're learning. You can invite parents in. In the beginning, it's very teacher directed, right? This is the artifact you need to create. Go learn about it, create it. As time goes on, teachers start handing more and more control to the students. So maybe students are in groups, but they get to choose what roles they have, or they get to choose, what kind of artifacts they want to create, right? They have a little more choice. Once you get comfortable with that as a teacher, you can move to problem-based learning, which is open-ended. You don't know what your students are going to create. You're presenting them with a problem and not a finished product that you want. And of course, because problems have lots of solutions, you don't know what they're going to create. And then finally, we give lots of control to kids and we let them identify the problem and solve it. And we are just there on the side, helping them, guiding them, supporting them. That's really where we want to get to. The more student autonomy and agency there is, the more they're going to learn. So let me talk about how this looks in my classroom. Let me give you a concrete example, and then we'll dive into the tools. This is my buddy, Andrews Nchesi. He is a teacher in Malawi. And when I first met him back in 2015, he told me about the incredible drought and famine that was going on in his country in southern Malawi. This is what Malawi looked like at the time. It's gotten a little bit better since then. But basically what Andrews told me is that his students were not able to come to school because they were hungry, and for them and their parents, they spent the day looking through the grass that you see there, looking for seeds. They literally couldn't get an education because they were starving to death. And so he was on a mission to try and find partnerships and build ways for him to have a school garden. And that's where we first met, is doing that kind of work. And I knew that a large reason for what was going on in his country was due to climate change. And so it was an opportunity for me to provide that perspective to my students as I taught about how the climate is changing. But at the same time, having nothing to do with Andrews, 2 years ago, this was donated to us, to our school. It's a hydroponics unit. So it's growing lettuce and kales and flowers with no soil. There's water that runs through those tubes with chemicals. And if you notice, it's not designed all that great. The plants on the top get lots of light. Plants on the bottom, not so much. And so what I told my students is, let's look at the Sustainable Development Goals. Let's see what applications hydroponics have. And let's go through the design process to make this unit better. Let's redesign it, because this is not a great design. And what they learned through that process is that hydroponics and aquaponics, so aquaponics is symbiotic with fish. Fish go to the bathroom, they feed the plants, plants clean the water, right? Hydroponics is with chemicals. What they learned is that both of those use 90% less water than traditional farming. And so when we had a call with Andrews' students that you see here, this is a picture from the actual call, and they were explaining about the impacts of climate change on their community, my students made an instant connection. And they said, we understand, we can grow food with 90% less water. This can help people in Malawi. And so they spent between 4 and 6 weeks with different classes using recycled materials and some other things that we can get our hands on that would be available in Malawi to build units where they could grow food with 90% less water. And they drew up plans. You can see these are aquaponics units with fish in those buckets. And we sent them over to Malawi, where right now there are 4 units based on my students' designs that are in place over there, in Andrews's, in his school. So that's just one example of how the design process and the SDGs can kind of intersect. But what you want to know if you're on this call today is, how do you do that, right? That's a great example, but you want to be able to put these things in place in your classroom. So let's start with some tools that you can use. I love Empathico. Full disclosure, in the past, I've had a financial relationship with them. I don't right now, but I have done some paid work for them before. But I'm sharing because I love their tool, and it's so easy. It is only available for kids K through 6 right now. So if you're not in the US, that's about the ages 6 through 11 or 12, give or take. But what it does is, you go on as a teacher. There are 10 different lessons that are tied to curriculum that you can fit into just about any curriculum. I know for me as a science teacher, 2 of them that I really like. One of them is about how do we use electricity and power in our community. Another one is let's collect data on weather. But there's also other ones for different subject areas, like let's look at the fairy tales in our or folk tales that are in our society and share them with another group. But you choose what lessons you're willing to do as a teacher. You choose what times you're available, and you choose what age your kids are. And the site will automatically match you with other classes that are more than 300 miles away that are willing to do the same lesson at the same time online. And then your connection happens right in the browser. So you can connect with another group of students. Your kids can start building those relationships in the same way that mine did with the kids in Kibera. It is all totally free. It is super easy to use, and you don't need to go to your IT guide because everything is done in the web browser. So I absolutely love that tool to get started. If you're interested in STEM and social emotional learning, I did some work for, like I said, for Empathico a couple months ago. There's a complete soup to nuts professional learning course on the intersection of those 2 things and how you can use Empathico to build that. Right there, you can see the link on the site, but that's just for teachers. That's not a student site, but that'll help you learn how to do this kind of work using Empathico in your classroom. Mystery Skype is super easy. It doesn't have to be with Skype, although it's not Mystery Skype, I guess. If you're using a different tool, it'll be Mystery Google Hangout or Mystery Zoom. But it started with Skype. And basically, my class and your class, we don't know where the location is of the other group. And we ask yes or no questions to try and see who can guess the other class's location first. It's a great way to have some fun while learning. It doesn't have to be location. Now that I'm a science teacher, we play a lot of mystery animal. It's how I teach animal classification. So your class might choose a lion, my class might choose a penguin, and we go back and forth, each class asking yes or no questions. Is your animal a vertebrate? Is it a mammal? So on and so forth. Is it a herbivore? To try and guess the other person's animal. I've seen kids even as young as kindergarten do this. They may not have math skills, but they know letters of the alphabet. So, if they're trying to guess a state, does your state begin with a vowel? Does it have more than one A in it? Etc. So they can use their letter skills. So it can be adapted to any different curriculum area. Great way to find connections, skypeintheclassroom.com. This is Microsoft's free site. You can see they have lots of other things in addition to Mystery Skype. But right in the middle, you'll see the Mystery Skype button. What I love about that is you can click on there and you can find a map. And you can zoom in anywhere in the world that you want and find teachers that are willing to connect with you for free. So when I'm doing a full day professional learning session, I usually zoom in on Kazakhstan. There are at least 6 teachers in Kazakhstan that are willing to connect with your class. So you can really find connections anywhere. But sometimes we have a problem where we're not in the same time zone, right? Like, so right now, Michael is in Taiwan, I'm here in Pennsylvania. If we both had groups of kids, they would not be in school at the same time. So how can we build connections across those time zones? So what we started doing was playing mystery Skype through video chat, through video messages. So we would record a question, we would send it to a group of kids, and actually it was Taiwan the first time we did this.
Really?
And they would, it just happens to be. So they looked at our question, they gave us, and then the next day they sent us a message with an answer and their question. And it was great because my kids would rush in every morning to see what the question was, but it took 3 months in order to be able to finish the game. And while we learned a lot about geography, we weren't able to build the same kind of relationships. So what we started doing is playing something called the 5-clue challenge. We would record 5 clues, starting with really broad and getting more specific. So our first clue might be something like, we're in a town in the United States. Second clue might be, we're in Pennsylvania, right? All the way getting more specific until the last clue gave it away. And we would send it to them and ask them to pause the video and do research each time to see how quickly they could find the answer. And then they would send the video back to us. And we did this for a couple of years before a teacher finally came to me and said, Mike, where are all these videos? These would be an amazing learning resource. And I said, well, I didn't save them. But at that same time, that's about when I became a Global Teacher Prize finalist and a Pennsylvania Teacher of the Year, and I started traveling. And I wanted to bring those experiences when I traveled back to my own students. And so I started recording my own 5-clue challenge videos and putting them on a website for my kids. So when I came home, they could try and guess where I was. And I would teach them how to use the Google search engine, when it was appropriate to use Google, the search, and when you should use Google Maps or Google image search, depending on the clues. It was my way of being able to teach them how to research also. But right now on the 5-clue challenge website, which is totally free, 5cluechallenge.com, there are more than 160 different videos. About 2/3 of them are from me, 1/3 of submissions from teachers and kids around the world. And you can see some different categories where you can play for free. Each video is about 2 minutes long. There are also 3 half-hour length TV shows that I did for PBS in our local area during COVID for kids that didn't have internet access that you can use in your classroom. And the 5-clue challenge is now also available on Alexa. So if you have an Amazon Alexa, you can play in your house just verbally through the Alexa. But that's another way that you can kind of share the world with your students. 3 different ways to play. I just talked about those. Another great opportunity are virtual field trips. So with virtual field trips, you get to talk with an expert, or maybe you go to a museum or a national park somewhere in the world and learn about a place that you wouldn't normally be able to go to because it's too far away. So the picture you see now is from Sandkab, which is a seabird hospital in South Africa. They love to bring your kids to their penguin pen, where your kids can meet penguins live on camera. And what I love about virtual field trips, and I'll talk specifically about Sandkab, but this is true for a lot of different places, is that the education director of that museum, or that seabird hospital in this case, or that national park, the park ranger, will adapt the lesson to whatever you're learning. They will, so you have a call ahead of time or an email exchange where you tell them, look, my kids are learning multiplication, and we work multiplication into this lesson, and your kids get this really amazing experience, but then it also fits your curriculum. So I have a video there, but it doesn't often play well in Zoom, so we're going to skip over that. But you can find that video on my website in the link that I give you later if you play around in there. So here are some different places that I love for virtual field trips that you can use. Explore by the Seat of Your Pants was started by Joe Grabowski up in Canada, and basically he partners with National Geographic to find the most amazing explorers from around the world that will take you along with them as they explore. So I know my students have gone under the ocean. We have gone into a volcano with someone studying volcanoes, wearing the big silver suit at the time. We've had some amazing experiences through this. They have several per week during the school year. If you sign up in time, you can get one of 9 camera slots where your kids can interact live with the person bringing you on the exploration. But if you're late and you still want to go, you can just watch. So you can experience it in real time as the explorer takes you around, but you don't have a camera slot if you don't make it one of those 9. But that's an amazing resource. Skype a Scientist is from the University of Connecticut. They have scientists that are in their network all over the world, and you can choose the demographics of the scientists that you want. So let's say you think it's important for your students to see that women can have amazing scientist jobs, women in STEM are important. You can choose to have a female scientist talk to you. If you're a high school teacher and you're teaching geology, you can find a geologist. One of the things that I've done before, like I said, my community lacks diversity. I've chosen that I want a scientist of color to talk to my kids because I want them to be able to experience that, to break some stereotypes that they may have. So you can choose the demographics, and Skype a Scientist will try and match you with what you're looking for. Skype in the Classroom, we talked about before. There are amazing virtual field trips. What I love about Microsoft's site, about Skype, is that it's usually one-on-one. So it's just that other park ranger or book author or museum and your class. So it's a one-on-one experience for your kids and they get to interact. And of course, everything I'm sharing for you, by the way, so far, I believe everything I'm going to share in this presentation, there might be one thing that's not, is the only price that we can afford as teachers. It's free, right? that's what we can do. Free is my favorite price. So all of these things are free. Encounter EDU is very STEM-based. A lot of them are either to the Arctic or under the ocean, but that's another fantastic site. Museum of Natural History has their own virtual field trips that will take you and show you some museum artifacts, but also take you in different locations. You can see some of the examples there. And Steve Sherman, so this is one that not a lot of people know about, so you're getting some inside information. Steve Sherman is a director at a science museum in South Africa. And what he does is he looks for the most interesting people in the world to interview and invites classes to join him. So through that, my students have talked with everybody from the director of NASA to a woman who all of the garbage that she's produced in the past 6 years fits into one mason jar, to talk about how she does that. We talked with a woman who had just gotten her PhD but was born with no arms, explaining how she overcame that disability and how she types research papers for my students to learn. So just really interesting people Steve finds. So that's a great site. But sometimes you can't find what you need. So Diane Smokorowski, who was the 2013 Kansas Teacher of the Year, came up with this great trick. On Google, you can do a site-specific search. So if you go to site:/twitter.com and type in what you're looking for, paleontologist, structural engineer, ornithologist, it will give you all of the Twitter profiles that have that word in it. You can then go to those profiles, vet those people, and either send them a Twitter message or go to their website and send on their contact me page and say, look, I've got a group of third graders or a group of high school calculus students who are really interested in learning more about whatever. Would you be willing to Zoom in or Google Hangout in with us for 15 minutes? And chances are that person's going to say yes, especially if you have students contact them. So that's a great way to find what you need if you can't find it through any of those other sites. Children are never too young to impact the world. So sometimes someone will say to me, I teach kindergarten kids, they could never pull this off. That's nonsense. Here's a story of kindergarten kids doing amazing work. Beth Heidemann was a kindergarten teacher up in Cushing, Maine. When I was in Kibera, I think this was the second time that I went, we Skyped her in with the school in the Kibera slum, a different school than I showed you before. And when the students started talking, they realized that food insecurity was a problem in both of their communities, that kids were hungry. And so what the Cushkins, what the kids in Maine decided to do was to write a book and publish it and sell it. And half of the proceeds from that book went to buying rice and beans for the kids in the school in Kibera. And half of the proceeds went to their local food pantry that they were trying to help. So even kids as young as kindergarten can do this kind of work. Don't think that because kids are young, they can't change the world. They absolutely can. Right now, Beth has left her kindergarten classroom, which is heartbreaking to me because she was one of the most amazing teachers I've ever known, but she is still doing incredible work. Go to Science. This is the one tool I'm sharing with you that is paid, but she has told me that you can get a 60-day free trial if you mention the code that I have on there, so you can get started and play around a little bit. During COVID, I know they had a bunch of free stuff like some of the other ed tech companies, but what they do, it's only for kindergarten, first and second grade. And when I was a kid, we had the choose your own adventure books. We'd read to like page 6 and it would say, if you want to go down to the, if you want to, look in the library for the mystery, go to page 27. And if you want to go outside, go to, it's the same kind of thing. They take kids to different amazing places in the world, the Galapagos Islands, on safari in Africa. And when students are watching, they can choose to go look for fossils down by the beach or up in the mountains. And then Beth and Curtis are there along with the video, sharing for them the scientific process and inquiry. I know that like if they find a bone in the video, they can 3D print that bone in their classroom. It's just a really cool tool. So if you're interested and you want to teach kids inquiry at kindergarten, first and second grade, that's an awesome site. This is one of their last scientific explorations that they recorded. They actually went to a village in up on the Kenya-Ugandan border, and they dug a well to see if it would, and went through the scientific process to see if the well would be able to produce water. So that was kind of a cool experience. There are lots of global projects that if you want to do this work and you want it all structured for you, that are available to you. Take Action Global, TAG. I actually helped found that. It is a nonprofit organization that's doing great work internationally. I founded it and was a director for a while, and then I stepped away. I really want to go back into my classroom. I miss my kids, so I didn't want to become a nonprofit director. So I stepped away. But Koen Timmers from Belgium and Jennifer Williams from the U.S. are still running that and doing incredible work. Their Take Action project focused on the SDGs. Happens every spring. That will take place next year. The Climate Action Project will kick off in September and October next year. Over 100,000 students from around the world looking at ways you can take action to make the climate better and to learn about climate action. I actually, when I was still working with TAG this year, I developed the teaching guides for that. So there are lots of resources. It tells you everything you need to get started, even if you're not a science teacher. So that's available for you. Global Goals Project will launch in the fall again. You're partnered with 16 other classrooms, each of you taking one of those global goals and working together as a team of 17 to put together a comprehensive project. And all of these are structured for you and free. And so the question I often get is, how do I get started, right? So now that I've shared all of those incredible tools for you, this is the scaffold. Start easy. Start with things like Empatico and the 5 Clue Challenge that are super easy to put into place in your classroom. Once you get comfortable with that, you want to move into things that are more interactive. The mystery Skype, the song exchanges, and you want to start having your kids interact with others from different places. Then you want to move into the virtual field trips and guest speakers. Start having your kids learn about some different problems in the world, and you want them to focus on that engineering design process and see their power. See how powerful they are to use the learning that happens in your classroom to make a difference in the world. Then you can move into those global projects. And of course, you can move these in different order if you're comfortable. But those global projects are a great way for kids to see that power, to put into action the design process, and to make a difference. And what you're really shooting for is that top level, where you create a culture in your school and in your classroom, where every time kids have an experience in their community, whether that community is local or global, they are looking for the entry point to say, this is what I'm passionate about. This is what I know that I can do. This is how I can make a difference. And when you hear those magic words, we should do something about that, you drop everything. And your job as a teacher is to build the curriculum into the thing your kids are passionate about. So often in our pre-service classes, we're taught, start with the curriculum and then find a cool way to teach it. I think that that's backwards. I've learned in my career that that's wrong. Start with the experience that makes kids want to beat down the walls of your classroom to get in. Start with that experience. And then you as a teacher, be creative enough to find a way to fit the curriculum into that. If you do that, the kids will never forget to learn, right? Start with the experience. And of course, kids are naturally compassionate, unless they've been taught to be otherwise. So we want to let the compassion of children show us how we can do this kind of work. So one last story for you. I mentioned Mystery Skype before. My first year teaching science was about 6 years ago. I didn't know what I was doing. I had just been announced as a Global Teacher Prize finalist, so I was having this incredible imposter syndrome, wondering if I was going to be able to pull off the things that I cared about in a science classroom. And during the first week of school, I started by having a mystery animal Skype to try and teach that animal classification like I was mentioning. And we connected with Livingston Kigode, who teaches up in a rural area in Western Kenya. And we played mystery animal. They chose a lion. We chose a penguin. I don't remember who won. Not really important. But afterwards, he took us on a tour of his village. And you can see the picture on the left here is an actual picture from that call. He showed us this bridge. And he showed us that how dangerous it was. and told us that kids in kindergarten and first grade were not allowed to go to school if they lived on one side of that bridge because it was too dangerous to cross. And that during the rainy season, which is what you see on the right there, during the rainy season, none of the kids that lived in half the village were able to go to school for a whole month because the bridge was too dangerous. And at that time, my kids told me, they said those magic words. They said, Mr. Soskil, we should do something about that. That's not right. I dropped everything. It was like I said, my first year teaching science, and I barely knew the curriculum, but I said, you know what, this is too important. And so I looked at the physics that I had to teach and Newton's laws of motion and how weight is distributed in bridges, and went on a learning journey of my own. And what students started doing is first they built bridges out of paper to try and solve the problem, and they tested them with pennies until they failed. And then they made the bridges stronger. And once they got good at that, they built bridges out of cardboard and then tested them with rocks to make them fail, and then made them better. And eventually they drew up their own blueprints and they sent it to a bridge designer in Kenya. And he told us that it would cost about $3,200 US to fix that bridge, to put a new bridge there based on our design. And that is, like I said, I teach in an economically depressed area. That was more than my students were going to be able to raise in a year. But they were determined. They had bake sales. They showed movies. We had the rights to show a movie, but we couldn't charge admission, obviously. But they sold popcorn. And they used the iPads that we had to take pictures of people with a green screen and put them in cool locations and charge them $1 to send it to their email addresses. They did everything they could. And by the end of the year, they raised about $1,200, about $2,000 short. But halfway through the year, I had a group of fifth graders who came to me and they said, Mr. Soskil, what if we built a website to be able to share what we're doing with people, and maybe we can get some donations from outside? And because of that innovation, because of that use of technology to share the humanity that my kids had, to share their compassion, we were able to bring in $2,500 through that website. So on the last week of school, I was able to show my students this. On the left-hand side is the bridge that they built. Now kids can go to school year-round. Everybody can go to school. And on the right, you see, as the bridge is being built, some of the kids that are excited that they're going to be able to use that bridge and to go to school. That's what's possible. That's what we can do if we get this right in school. Our children are amazing. Our students are incredible. If we just let them use their talents and their passions and what they learn in school to make the world a better place. So finally, I will leave you with this. Doing this work is hard. Sometimes we get pushback. Sometimes it is not, anything that is different sometimes faces some backlash. And we need to, as teachers, be able to push through that. And so the only way we can do that is if we surround ourselves with the right people. So Jennifer Gonzalez, some of you may know this, wrote a great blog post years ago about finding your marigolds. So this is a picture of my actual school garden. You can see there's marigolds planted there next to our tomato and pepper plants because marigolds keep the pests away. What Jennifer writes is that you never plant your garden underneath a walnut tree because it makes the soil toxic. So each of us as teachers needs to find our marigolds, find our teachers who are going to inspire us and encourage us to do this kind of work with kids, and stay away from the negative people, the walnut trees who are going to take our energy. And sometimes those people are in your location, in your school, and sometimes those people are online, but surround yourself with the right people who are going to help you do this work for kids because it is so, so important. So thank you so much. We have some time for questions and answers. I think we have about 5 minutes. If you want these slides, the slide deck, you can go to mynameMichaelSoskil.com/humanity. And the slides are there available for you. There's also resources on that website for you. A lot of the things that we talked about, you can kind of play around. You can find the 5-clue challenge on there. But all of these slides are there for you. And maybe, Michael, can you maybe type that in the chat, that link, so when I move on, people can get it?
For sure.
Yep, michaelsoskil.com/humanity. And I'm going to ask, since we have a couple of minutes while we're taking some questions and answers, if you go to menti.com and put in that code, tell me, I want some feedback. What are the 3 words that describe what you learned in this webinar? You can tell me things that you're going to implement in your classroom, your favorite tools, how you're feeling, just any impression that you have of today. Go ahead and put that in, and I will share your answers. We'll make that a word cloud, and I'll let you see that. And if it's positive, then I'll let you take a screenshot. If you tell me that I did a terrible job, then maybe we'll hide that. But no, I'm just joking. You guys will be able to see that, see what the reactions are. So thank you so much, Michael.
Yeah, we got some questions for you, Michael, actually.
Yeah, good, yeah.
So,
go ahead.
yeah. Well, the first one would be like, well, could you please share with us, like, what makes you so successful? Like, what's your secret to success? I mean, you're like a Global Teacher Prize Award winner, and then you're like Philadelphia Teacher of the Year already. Like, what makes you so successful?
Yeah. That's a tough question to answer because it forces me to kind of look at so, yeah, I mean, well, one, I have some, I would have to acknowledge, I have some privileges that other people don't have, right? So I was able to get into a decent school and work my way through college. I had the financial ability to be able to get myself into a teaching position. And then because of that background, I teach in my hometown. And so those relationships allowed me to do some things. And, so I have to acknowledge that there's things in my background that have given me an advantage. That being said, I also think that I have been willing to take risks and push the envelope for my students. I have always gone by the, ask forgiveness and not permission kind of mantra. And because of that, I have tried things in my classroom that maybe I otherwise wouldn't have if I was scared to. And I haven't been afraid of failure. I've never focused on needing to pass standardized tests. I always just figured that would take care of itself. And if it didn't, so be it. So I've always tried to do cool things for my students. And my own journey, I shared that PBL progression. That was very much my experience. About 15 years ago, I started dabbling with project-based learning. That led to more student control, which led to problem-based learning, which led to the kinds of things that we're talking about now. So, if you know it's right for kids, do it. That's the best advice you give there. Yeah.
Thank you, Michael. What next? Like, where do you want to go from here? I mean, do you have any goals that you want to achieve next?
Yeah. So, actually, I just put up this screen. So, I actually took a year off teaching this year. I took a 1 year unpaid leave of absence sabbatical. I'll be going back in my classroom next year. To the same science position I was before. But the reason I did that is to put together the book that you see on the screen here, Flip the System, How Teachers Can Transform Education and Save Democracy. And the case that I'm making in this book is that in order for our democracy to be healthy, we need an education system that is equitable, that is just, that provides opportunity for all, and that is driven by the collective expertise of teachers. Because teachers know what students need, students plural, right? Parents know what their child needs, but only teachers serve at the intersection of policy and practice and are able to speak for the collective students because we've had so many of them. And so the teaching profession needs to drive those education decisions. And so there's 33 authors. Most of them are Teachers of the Year, highly recognized teachers from across the United States, and also some of the world's leading education researchers. Pasi Sahlberg from Finland has a chapter, Andy Hargraves from up at Boston College, but each sharing their perspective on this. And so that's where I'm headed right now. I see
Got it.
A lot of those issues in society that I think education can solve. I want to work on systemic change. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So are there any ongoing life-changing projects that you're working on right now? Like
yeah, so those kind of student projects, not right now, because I was out of my classroom for this year. But I will say this, none of those projects that I shared came from me. They were never something that I said, ooh, let's do this to my students. It was always them saying, ooh, there's something wrong with this. We want to get involved. And I should share that for every project that we did, there's probably 3 or 4 projects that my kids were kind of interested in and then never really followed through on, right? So it really is driven by student passion. And we want that, right? We want students to have ownership over the projects that they're trying to get involved in.
Got it. Thank you so much, Michael. Here's a really tough question for you. I mean, what does education mean to you?
Yeah, so I truly believe that education is the answer to just about any of our societal problems. Not in isolation. There are definitely structural issues that have to get changed. But if we don't get education right, then nothing else can be gotten right.
True.
So, political issues, we can work on political solutions, but unless we get education right, we can't build the kind of democracy we want. Whether it's ignorance, whether it's intolerance, whether it's systemic injustice, education is a key part of making sure we get all those things right, and specifically public education. And that's why I do what I do. So, like I explained why I do what I do in my classroom, but why I do, outside of my classroom, why I advocate for teachers, why I advocate for public education is because I do believe it is a solution.
Got it. All right. Thank you so much, Michael. Thank you so much for this thought-provoking, inspirational speech. let me see. How do you think education? Oh, we got another question for you. Do you have more time? How
Yeah,
do
yeah.
you, it's a bit tough actually. Like, how do you think educators should teach about racism?
Yeah, so that's it's a
Yeah.
massive question. So one, I will acknowledge I am not totally qualified to speak about that, right? I mean, you know,
Mm,
I've had many privileges because of my skin color, because of my background, because I grew up in a middle class household. But I will say we have to start teaching real history and not colonialistic history through the lens of the victors. So that includes making sure that we teach the truth about what's happened to Native Americans here in the United States, making sure that we teach the truth about white supremacy in the United States, looking at the Civil War from that aspect. One of the first books that set me on the road to seeing education differently was Lies My Teacher Told Me by James Lowen. And it was really about how we teach history in schools. So that is not at all a comprehensive answer, but that's a great place to get started.
right. Got it. Thank you so much, Michael. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Let's give Michael another round of applause.
Thank you all for joining us today. This was great.
Yeah, thank you. So we might have another webinar coming up in July. So please just stick around. Check out our website at www.ipevo.com and follow us on social media such as Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. Just search for IPEVO and then you'll find the latest information about IPEVO products as well as our latest information. All right. Once again, thank you so much, Michael.
Hi, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. See you guys next time. In the meantime, take care. Bye.